Yes.
Hi. Welcome to the Flower Town Country Club. Thank you for coming to the Historical Society event. We love doing these events. They're always so fun, and we learn so much. And I hope you all appreciate the diversity of programs that we're trying to bring, and keep looking for more opportunities to engage with us. We're sending out emails all the time with other events. So for today's event, we have Tom Keels. He is a local historian and always has great presentations, and this is such an interesting subject. So I'm just going to pass it over to Tom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thanks, everybody. Can people hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. It is a great pleasure to be here today to give this presentation for the Springfield Township Historical Society. It was, I believe, about 25 years ago that I gave one of my first public lectures about the Andorra Natural Area to the Springfield Society. And 25 years and 7 books later, both they and I are still going strong. And it's so nice to be here today to talk about a fun topic. Before I start, there is somebody I really must give thanks to, my dear friend Cindy Charleston Rosenberg, who is not only an old and treasured friend, but who is also one of the top art appraisers in the United States, who gave very generously of her time and expertise to help me with this project. So, Cindy, thank you very much. So enough about that. Let's move on to Rogues Gallery, or when rich people spend good money on bad art. Now, recently there's been a great deal of talk in the news about Linwood Hall, a palatial but long neglected estate in Cheltenham Township. The estate was recently acquired by the Linwood Hall Preservation Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to restoring this magnificent structure as a museum and cultural center. As you can see, they seem to be off to a very good start. Designed by Horace Trumbauer as the centerpiece of a 150-acre estate, the 110-room mansion was constructed between 1898 and 1900 for Peter Errol Brown Widener, universally known as P.A.B. Widener. This shows Mr. Widener in front of a picture painted by his good friend John Singer Sargent. This is one of Widener's favorite paintings, called The Satyr and the Peasant by Johann Liss. And at any rate, if the picture looks at all familiar, it has been in the news lately. Earlier this week at the Explorers Club in New York, Peter R. Widener, the great-great-great-grandson of the gentleman in the picture, announced that he was selling the picture to Stephen Schwartzman, the well-known arbitrageur and financier, for what has been described as a multi-million-dollar donation to the Linwood Hall Preservation Foundation. The picture is going to go in Mr. Schwartzman's private collection up in Miramar, which, ironically enough, is the former Widener Mansion in Newport. So, at any rate, to get back to the subject of the picture, Peter Widener became a butcher while he was still a teenager and made his first fortune of $50,000 by selling meat to the Union troops during the Civil War. He then served as the treasurer of Philadelphia for a decade, and then in 1883 co-founded the Philadelphia Traction Company. This was a horse-drawn trolley company in the day when everybody took trolleys, and eventually he expanded it until he became known as the Traction King of America. From there on, there was no stopping. He sort of pyramided his fortune into steamships, steel, oil, you name it, his money was there. By 1900, he had a personal fortune of about $30 million, making him one of the wealthiest men in America. Well, Widener felt that the time had come to move his family into the top tier of Philadelphia society. And this meant trading in his eclectic palazzo at North Broad Street and Girard Avenue, designed by Willis G. Hale in the 1880s, and already a bit of an architectural embarrassment, for the relatively restrained neoclassical splendor of Linwood Hall. Now, a central feature of Linwood Hall was a two-story art gallery, about 90 feet in length, in the center of the north wing, and access from the landing of a magnificent double staircase. Widener always considered the art gallery to be the true heart of Linwood Hall. Its walls bedecked in red velvet and its floor covered by a rare 17th century Ispahan carpet, the gallery was a suitable setting for his collection of nearly 300 paintings. His grandson Peter would later call Linwood Hall the house that art built. Widener was so proud of his collection that he allowed the public to view it for just a nominal fee from October until June. He also published a catalog, a 2-volume catalog of his art collection, bound in Morocco leather and featuring exquisite engravings by Goupil of Paris. Limited to 250 copies, this catalog was shared with Widener's fellow millionaires and art collectors. This set, inscribed to the financier George J. Gould, is currently on sale for ABE Books for a mere $1,500. Luckily, it has been digitized online, and those are the illustrations we'll be seeing today. Another recipient of the catalog was Widener's friend and poker buddy, John G. Johnson, a corporate lawyer who handled all of the legal affairs for Widener's many concerns, as well as those for the Pennsylvania Railroad and Standard Oil and other major corporations. Johnson, the son of a Chestnut Hill blacksmith, had amassed his own fortune and was busy amassing his own collection in his South Broad Street mansion, which is partly visible at the right. But his collection got so big that he had to acquire the adjoining mansion, seen in the center, for his 1,000 paintings, several hundred sculptures, and 2,500 volume library. Johnson focused on early Italian, Dutch, and Flemish paintings. Among his prizes was the Crucifixion Diptych by Rogier van der Weyden. Johnson bought the left panel showing St. John and the Virgin Mary, and then later acquired the right panel with Christ on the cross from his good friend Widener. But that still left Widener with plenty of jewels in his crown. Among the prized possessions in his collection were several Rembrandts, including the Standard Bearer and the Self-Portrait at right, 2 Frans Hals, the Cat Merchant and the Lovers, or the Merry Couple, and not 1, not 2, but count them, 3 Vermeers, the Sleeping Servant, the Card Players, and Portrait of a Boy. Yeah, I know, we're getting there. In 1908, Widener was a little peeved to discover that none of his 3 Vermeers had been included in a newly published catalogue raisonné on Dutch Old Masters compiled by the art historian and curator Cornelis Hofstede de Groot. Now, de Groot was one of an emerging group of art experts known as connoisseurs, along with Wilhelm van Bode, W.R. Valentiner, Bernard Berenson, and Roger Fry. These men devoted themselves to the study of a specific artist or a school of artists, learning every facet of their lives, styles, techniques, methods, and materials. Through their publications, especially the Catalogue Raisonné, which attempted to list every verified work by a specific artist, these connoisseurs became the final authority on whether or not a painting was legitimate. So you can imagine Widener's discomfiture to find that none of his 3 Vermeers were included. Widener extended an invitation to de Groot to travel from Holland to Linwood Hall with his assistant Wilhelm Valentiner. The 2 men took a long, hard look at Mr. Widener's Vermeers and the rest of his collection, and then they sat down to have a long, hard talk with Mr. Widener. In the wake of de Groot's visit, a council of connoisseurs was consulted to review Widener's prize collection. Bernard Berenson evaluated the Italian works, Roger Fry the English, and Max Friedlander and Wilhelm von Bode the Dutch and Flemish primitives. Their final and collective verdict: shocking. Widener's collection did include some genuine masterpieces, such as Bordoni's Baptism of Christ and de Hook's The Bedroom, sold to him by reputable dealers like Colnaghi's of London. But at least a third of Widener's collection, that's about 100 out of 300 paintings, was, to use the technical term, pure crap. Some were works by obscure artists relabeled as famous ones. For instance, The Sleeping Servant was not by Vermeer, but by an obscure Dutch artist called Esaias Morse. The Lovers was not by Frans Hals, but by his less talented son, Harmen Hals. But others were copies of famous works in European collections. The Standard Bearer, for which Widener had paid $95,000, that's the equivalent of $3.5 million today, was a copy of an original in the collection of the Baron de Rothschild in Paris. But most were just out-and-out fakes, whipped up in some backroom studio. On the waterfall, supposedly by a 17th century artist Jacob van Ruysdael, de Groot noted that, quote, "The paint was still wet, soft, and sticky." Not something you expect to find on a 250-year-old painting. Nearly all of the ersatz masterpieces came from a single source, an art dealer named Leo Nardus, a partner in the firm of Nardus and Bourgeois, who split his time between Paris and New York. Besides Widener, Nardus's clients included J.P. Morgan and Sir William C. Van Horn, the president of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Widener had purchased 93 paintings from Nardus between 1894 and 1908, spending anywhere from $2 to $5 million in $1,900, which would be between $75 and $180 million today. All of these works were at best worth 5% of Widener's total outlay. Now, Leo Nardus is a fascinating character who really deserves a book of his own. Born Leo Solomon to a family of well-off antique dealers, he reinvented himself as a dashing, debonair man of the world, fluent in at least 4 languages. He was also an expert swordsman who won the bronze medal for épée for the Netherlands at the 1912 Summer Games, a world-class chess master who triumphed over such champions as Frank James Mitchell, a competent painter in his own right, and a discerning collector who owned works by Rubens, Goya, and this one by Botticelli. Oh yes, he was also one of the biggest con artists that the world has ever seen. He was the kind of charismatic hustler who could convince you that a postage stamp was actually a rare Michelangelo miniature from the artist's perforated period, easily worth $500,000. Most of the fakes might have been painted by Nardus himself or by his assistant and restorer, Theo van Wijngaarden, a master forger in his own right. Well, after the connoisseur's judgment, a long correspondence ensued between Widener and Nardus, with the master swordsman deftly deflecting the millionaire's increasingly irate demands for restitution. Finally, Nardus offered to replace any unsatisfactory old masters with a new batch that he had just whipped up. That he had just acquired from a well-known but anonymous collection. But as for coughing up cold hard cash, I'm sorry, PAB, that's not going to happen. After accusing Nardus of selling falsely attributed paintings under gross false pretenses, Widener ordered John G. Johnson to take Nardus to court. Instead, Johnson begged his old friend and client to bear the loss in silence. Johnson, it seems, had also bought a number of paintings from Nardus, including the supposed Da Vinci of a young man in a landscape and the supposed Rembrandt, head of an old man. As a matter of fact, Johnson had recommended Nardus to his friend Widener as an agent. Johnson realized that any public trial would result in little or no reimbursement while exposing both Widener and Johnson to public ridicule. Eventually, Widener backed down and grudgingly accepted some replacements from Nardus, including 2 Rembrandt panels showing the heads of St. Matthew and an aged woman. Today, they have been recategorized as Workshop of Rembrandt. Now, before we go any further, a little word about attribution. Many of the works we consider an old master, like a Rembrandt or a Rubens, were actually sort of works by committee. Many of the old master artists ran workshops or academies where paying students and apprentices would assist them in exchange for training. And this was especially true of Rembrandt. He was sort of the Henry Ford running a assembly line of art, who charged his students 100 guilders a year. Today, there are approximately 300 to 350 Rembrandts that are recognized as autograph, where Rembrandt's hand is significantly represented. That's down from about 1,000 at the turn of the 20th century. Then you have Rembrandt and Workshop, where a significant degree of work was done by his assistants, but his hand is represented. Then you have Workshop or Studio of Rembrandt, where his assistants really did all the real work, but he oversaw and signed off on the project. After that, you descend into the hotter circles of Rembrandt L. School of Rembrandt implies his work was created by an anonymous pupil or follower. Circle of indicates the work is from his period and reflects his style, but the connection to the artist is vaguer. Then you have works tactfully known as follower of, in the style of, or imitator of Rembrandt. These are roughly equivalent to painted by some guy who might have bumped into Rembrandt on a crowded Amsterdam street. And I think it's safe to say that this was the level of many of the Rembrandts that were hanging on Widener's walls. Meanwhile, back at Linwood Hall, a major spring cleaning was underway, with all of the dubious paintings from Nardus and other dicey dealers being cleared out under the direction of de Groot. Some of the better ones were sold at auction in Europe, far away from Philadelphia, but many of them were simply banished to the basement, and many of those were thrown in the furnace when no one was looking. Going forward, Widener would rely on more reputable dealers like Knoedler, Nathan Wildenstein, or Joseph Duveen. Widener had already called on Duveen to supply many of the antiques and furnishings that adorned Linwood Hall. Widener would also have every potential purchase vetted by the leading connoisseur. The Nardus debacle cemented the reputations of these experts as absolute arbiters of quality and authenticity. It became virtually impossible to sell any major painting to any major collector without obtaining signed attribution from the appropriate connoisseur. But of course, beneath this new veneer of virtue, the old shell game carried on. These incorruptible experts saw no conflict of interest in selling their expertise to the highest bidder. De Groot made a fortune selling certificates of authentication, even having forms pre-printed. Bernard Berenson received a secret 10% commission from Joseph Duveen for every Italian painting that he authenticated as an old master. And of course, this made sure that a lot of mid-level Maronis and Bassanos got reattributed as higher priced Titians and Tintorettos. And, what can I say? Even, Florentine villas like I Tatti are so expensive to maintain. And even the great Berenson was fallible, falling for old masters that were actually painted by the contemporary artist Icilio Federico Ioni. So while Duveen and company did stick Widener with a few ringers, they also helped him and his son Joseph assemble one of the finest art collections in the world. It included such jewels as Vermeer's Woman Holding a Scale, Raphael's Small Cowper Madonna, and Rembrandt's The Mill. For these three paintings alone, Widener paid the total of $1.24 million, which would be about $41 million today. The 101 paintings of the Widener collection along with thousands of other objets d'art, would form one of the keynote collections of the new National Gallery of Art, which opened its doors in Washington in early 1941. Meanwhile, John G. Johnson bequeathed his refurbished collection of over 1,200 paintings to the city of Philadelphia upon his death in 1917. Although the city did have to spend years breaking the lawyer's watertight will to have the paintings transferred from their cramped quarters on South Broad Street to their current home at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Johnson's collection, which includes works by Titian, Botticelli, Van Eyck, Rembrandt, Steen, Sargent, Degas, and Manet, transformed the still young museum into a world-class institution. As for Leonardus, he left Europe in 1921, his reputation tarnished by the Widener affair and other scandals. He took up residence in a luxurious Tunisian villa where he spent his golden years teaching chess to the natives until his death in 1955 at the age of 87. But he had to leave his collection of 160 precious paintings behind in Europe. During World War II, it was seized by the Nazis. In recent years, a few works such as this Botticelli have been recovered and restituted to Nardus descendants. I have no word on whether or not the Widener descendants have been in touch with the Nardus descendants to discuss their own restitution. Now, the Widener fable is an illustration of the adage, with apologies to Jane Austen, that it is a truth universally acknowledged that a nouveau riche in possession of a good fortune must be in want of an art collection. Since the dawn of civilization, new money has always lusted after old art as an admission ticket into high society. Centuries before the birth of Christ, Phoenician traders were peddling fake Syrian and Egyptian relics that were supposed to be over a millennium old, even back then. In ancient Rome, no nouveau riche household would be without that ultimate status symbol, a Greek antiquity, which was usually fake. Horace, the Greek poet, wrote that he who knows 1,000 works of art knows 1,000 frauds. When the immortal Michelangelo was a young artist, he made ends meet by becoming a master forger. Besides faking rare manuscripts, he allegedly carved a pseudo-Roman sculpture called Sleeping Cupid, antiqued it, and then sold it to the Cardinal Raphael Riario. Although the cardinal caught wind of the fraud and got his money back, he recognized Michelangelo's talent and became his patron. He commissioned 2 works from Michelangelo, including this Bacchus, now on display at the Bargello Museum in Florence. Rome in the 17th and 18th centuries was full of painting galleys. Not galleries, but galleys, like the Roman slave ships with all the guys in chains, except here you had dozens of starving artists who were painting hundreds of fake old masters. And these were often sold to young English and German gentlemen to take home as souvenirs of their grand tour. In many cases, they knew they were fake. They didn't care. We don't have postcards. We don't have selfies. Let's take home a fake Raphael. But of course, in the 19th and 20th century, many of these copies would be recycled as genuine old masters by shysters like Leonardus to take advantage of their American clients. Now, in America, spiritual home of Horatio Alger, collecting art has always been a tried and true way to hobnob with the better classes. And this was especially true in Philadelphia, where there's always been a strong bond between the social and artistic classes. The Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, or PAFA, founded in 1805, represented an alliance between artists like Charles Wilson Peale and civic leaders like Joseph Hopkinson. And in 19th century America, the workshop of the world, clever artisans and engineers could become millionaires and art collectors in one generation. Joseph Harrison Jr. grew up poor in Kensington, but made a fortune manufacturing steam locomotives. In the 1840s, he oversaw the construction of the Moscow-St. Petersburg Railroad for the Russian government. Afterwards, he spent 2 years touring Europe, building his collection, before returning to Philadelphia in 1852. He commissioned Samuel Sloan to design this large mansion on the east side of Rittenhouse Square. It featured a domed picture galleries, one of the first private galleries in Philadelphia. And before long, the poor boy from Kensington was on the boards of PAFA, the Fairmount Park Commission, the Philadelphia School of Design for Women, today Moore College, and the Pennsylvania Museum and School for Industrial Art, today the Museum of Art. After Harrison's death in 1874, his wife contributed most of his collection to PAFA, including Gilbert Stuart's portrait of Washington, Charles Wilson Keels, the artist, in his museum, and Benjamin West's William Penn's treaty with the Indians. Harrison's neighbors on Rittenhouse Square included William and Anna Wilstack. William accumulated a big enough fortune from his saddlery business to travel to Europe, retiring at age 48, and collect contemporary artists like Michele Munchesi and Carl Friedrich Lessing. He and his wife Anna left their collection of 150 paintings to form the nucleus of a new gallery of art to be constructed in Fairmount Park, which later took shape as today's Museum of Art. They also left a substantial sum of $500,000 to expand and care for the collection. Since then, the W.P. Wilstack Fund has supported nearly 1,000 acquisitions for the museum, including the Annunciation by Tanner and Paul Cézanne's Large Bathers. But Harrison and the Wilstacks were hands-on collectors. They had traveled extensively in Europe and educated themselves about the art market. They engaged trained artists as their overseas agents. And they focused on either American art, which was not considered important enough to copy, or on contemporary European art, where the artist was still alive. But after the Civil War, America's surging industrial wealth created a generation of robber barons competing with each other for the best of everything, including art. And when you're focused on creating a steel or oil cartel, you just don't have that much time to study the art market. So much unlimited wealth chasing after such a limited commodity created a winner-take-all mentality and transformed the art market into a high-stakes casino with robber barons like Morgan, Frick, and Widener gobbling up every artifact in sight. And there was something about art that caused the savviest robber baron to behave like a kid in a candy store. The February 1899 issue of The Art Collector commented on how the same man who would hire a team of experts to analyze a potential corporate acquisition for months would buy pictures as he would buy books by the yard, and takes a special delight in throwing to the winds the conventions that all his life have contributed to his success. Then it is that he becomes the ready victim of the dealer in art green goods, that's fake art, who has the greatest cunning in playing upon his vanity and stimulating his self-esteem, paging Leonardus. Well, since this is the Springfield Township Historical Society, you know that sooner or later all roads lead to White Marsh Hall and Edward and Davis Stotesbury. Now, this is a bit of tangent because we're not talking about a collector getting duped into buying bad or fake art, but we are talking about someone who bought his art at the height of the market at very inflated prices and then tried to sell at the absolute bottom. So unfortunately, the Stotesburys still qualify as art victims. And by the way, I am indebted to Sintra and Wayne Wilcox for much of the following information about the Stotesbury art collections, especially the excellent inventories Wayne has compiled on his wonderful website, stotesbury.com. I also need to thank my friends at the Facebook page, Fans of White Marsh Hall. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, Edward T. Stotesbury was the head of Drexel & Company, Philadelphia's leading investment bank, and senior partner in its New York affiliate, J.P. Morgan & Company. As early as 1919, he had an annual income of nearly $6 million and was known as the richest man at Morgan's. During the Roaring Twenties, his personal fortune soared to roughly $100 million. Today, that would put him pretty much in the Elon Musk category. Stotesbury began collecting art in the 1890s, shortly after the widower moved from Germantown to 1925 Walnut Street on Rittenhouse Square. His early collection consisted of the typical European landscapes, narratives, and genre paintings popular at the time, acquired through the New York dealers William and Herman Schaus. But beginning in 1906, Stotesbury began to purchase old English masters through a London dealer. Shown here are the first two English paintings he acquired, both by George Romney, Miss Charlotte Margaret Gunning, later Mrs. Digby, and a very blurry copy of the Vernon Children. Stotesbury's taste for English art intensified after he married his second wife, Lucretia Roberts Cromwell, known as Ava, in 1912. Ava soon fell under the spell of the English dealer Joseph Duveen, whom she would say taught her how to live. Duveen, in turn, introduced the Stotesburys to the architect Horace Trumbauer, as well as the decorator Charles Allen. To establish Ava as the social queen of Philadelphia, Stotesbury bought the building next to his at 1923 Walnut. He then hired Trumbauer to turn the conjoined house into a showcase residence. The new ballroom alone cost $1.5 million. Today, it survives as one of the most popular wedding venues in Philadelphia. Duveen filled the house with European art, some French, but mostly English old masters, like Romney, Gainsborough, Lawrence, Hoppner. Most of Stotesbury's earlier collection was put in storage, later to be sold. Between 1916 and 1922, Stotesbury spent over $2 million to construct White Marsh Hall, a 147-room palace on a 300-acre estate in Springfield Township. Take that, P.A.B. Widener. Trumbauer designed the building, and Duveen once again filled it with European art and furnishings. Besides English old masters, Duveen sold the Stotesburys many other notable pieces, including French statuary by Clodion, Pajou, and Tessert. These photos show one of the Clodion statues in the Palm Court Rotunda and the Tessert statue of love and friendship in the entrance hall. Duveen also supplied several magnificent sets of Beauvais tapestries designed by Francois Boucher, including a series showing a fantastic vision of life in China. These decorated the grand ballroom at White Marsh Hall. Also shown here is the magnificent 16th century Isfahan carpet, about 50 feet long, for which Stotesbury paid Duveen $40,000 in 1922. You did not go bargain hunting at Duveen's. Stotesbury probably paid Duveen well over $2 million for all of the art and furnishings of White Marsh Hall. In other words, about the same amount that it took to build the hall itself. But unlike Johnson and Widener, Stotesbury never really got badly burned on fake art. Part of that was because Duveen did not want to alienate a major client, but part of it was also because Stotesbury was a very savvy customer, at least when it came to English old masters. The Philadelphia artist George Biddle recorded a conversation he had with Stotesbury in his memoir. Mr. Edward T. Stotesbury grasped the significance of a painting with the same sharp, ruthless detachment with which he envisioned traction, steel, or finance as part of an entire industrial picture. Small, electric, wiry, he hurried from canvas to canvas, snapping out the appraisal like a ticker tape. That Gainsborough in the corner, Mr. Biddle. No, what's his name? Reynolds. Oh, I guess I was right. Yes, it is a Gainsborough. Well, I was top-heavy with Dutch 2 years ago. My wife, too, has very shrewd hunches. Mrs. Stotesbury has been advising me for some time to soft pedal on the French. I got Duveen on the phone, and I made a deal. I traded in some early Italian, primitives, and got a couple of bouchées and Dutch thrown in. Market was plugged, unloaded just in time, concentrated on English. Oh, and by the way, Biddle, never buy the men, not worth twice the price. As he did with other wealthy clients, Duveen lavished gifts upon the Stotesburys, especially Ava. Duveen reportedly commissioned the popular London society painter Douglas Chandor to execute a pastel portrait of Ava wearing her fabulous emeralds and presented it to her as a Christmas gift. Duveen also gave the Stotesburys this white marble bust of a lady from the collection of the Countess of Carnarvon, which graced the reception room mantel. Although the sculptor was never specified, Duveen implied it was by Houdon with an estimated value of $25,000. It appears that the Stotesburys originally intended to leave their entire collection to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In 1923, the museum exhibited 23 of the English Old Masters, along with the Boucher tapestries, French furniture, and Chinese porcelains. But by the time of Stotesbury's death in 1938, his fortune had dwindled from $100 million to only $4 million. His will directed that all of the paintings be sold, along with the tapestries, furniture, and porcelains. At first, Ava attempted to sell the French statuary as well, but was offered such low prices that she donated the statues to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In October 1944, an auction of Ava's personal possessions was held at Samuel T. Freeman. Although thousands attended the preview, the sales were disappointing. But the final humiliation came the following month when the main Stotesbury collection of art and furnishings was removed from the Philadelphia Museum of Art and sold at auction in New York. The Romney painting of the Vernon children fetched $22,000, but no other painting brought more than $10,000. The magnificent Isfahan carpet, which had cost $40,000, went for $5,000. The auction was, in the words of PMA Director Fis Kimball, a butchery. Entire proceeds of the sale were less than $200,000, a far cry from the more than $2 million that the Stotesburys paid Duveen. Kimball concluded, Duveen must have turned in his grave, or on the spit. Thus was scattered one of the finest collections of English Old Masters in America. If it had remained at the Philadelphia Museum of Art with the Elkins and the McFadden paintings, it would have placed that museum's collection on the same level as the Frick or the Huntington. Ava Stotesbury even thought about selling that lovely marble bust, the one Duveen had given her back in the 20s, possibly by Houdon, worth $25,000. But then an appraiser explained that it was a modern copy worth maybe $1,000 at the most. So much for Lord Duveen's generosity to his treasured clients. Well, while the Stotesbury collection was being knocked down for pennies on the dollar, its former home had been commandeered by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Fearful of Nazi warplanes bombing Manhattan after Pearl Harbor, the Met leased Whitemarsh Hall in early 1942 and fitted it out as a combination laboratory, warehouse, and dormitory for a staff of nearly 20 curators and conservators. Beginning in February 1942, roughly 15,000 priceless works of art were removed from the Metropolitan and spirited away to Whitemarsh Hall in the dead of night in convoys of moving vans protected by armed guards. This photo shows Van Dyck's portrait of John Stewart being loaded up. The staff was led by Murray Pease, a Harvard graduate charged with creating a new department for conservation at the Met. He's shown here with William Chapman, the Metropolitan Superintendent, inspecting a recent arrival at Whitemarsh Hall. Pease was a proponent of the newer cutting-edge technologies being used to validate and test art, like chemical analysis, X-ray and ultraviolet testing. Many of the museum's holdings given to them by wealthy patrons over the past 70 years had never been tested for authenticity. Under Pisa's direction, thousands of the Met's most valuable holdings were cleaned, repaired, evaluated, and sometimes reattributed before being hung on metal frames in the former Grand Ballroom. According to one account, the number of Rembrandts categorized as genuine or autograph in the Met's collection was reduced by 1/2 during this time. By the end of 1943, White Marsh Hall housed about 28,000 works of art, not just from the Met, but from other New York repositories as well. This Aladdin's cave of priceless art was protected by one chain wire fence, several armed guards, and the fierce watchdog you see there. By the way, the fierce watchdog was named Peggy, and it was actually Mr. and Mrs. Chapman's beloved pet. But it looked fierce. So, well, despite this limited protection, all of the masterpieces were returned safe and sound to New York in 1944. Now, during this period, other museums were also using these same techniques to test and reclassify suspect old masters. At the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the new technology was partially responsible for these two crucifixions being downgraded. The one on the left went from Rembrandt to imitator of Rembrandt. The one on the right went from El Greco to El Greco and Workshop. But all of this new technology didn't stop art fraud. In the 1920s, Joseph Devine discovered two new Vermeers, the Smiling Girl and the Lace Maker. Both were confirmed as genuine by important connoisseurs. Both paintings were snapped up by Andrew W. Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury and heir to a Pittsburgh banking, steel, and oil fortune. Mellon was also one of the country's leading art collectors. The two Vermeers seemed like perfect companion pieces for his girl with a red hat. After Mellon's death in 1937, his collection was also bequeathed to the new National Gallery of Art in Washington. It would take years for the National Gallery to admit that both the Smiling Girl and the Lace Maker were the works of Leonardus associate Theo van Wijngaarden and his protege, Han van Meegeren. After apprenticing with Wijngaarden, Van Meegeren hit the big time in the 1930s with his other fake Vermeers. The Supper at Emmaus hung in the Museum Boijmans in Rotterdam for many years as a Vermeer. Christ with the Adulteress was snapped up by Hermann Goering during the Nazi occupation of Holland during World War II. It almost got Van Meegeren executed as a Nazi collaborator until he demonstrated his forgery techniques before a post-war jury. Well, as the technology for verifying and analyzing antiquities continues to advance, it has united with traditional connoisseurship to produce some stunning recent reattributions in the art world. State-of-the-art techniques like infrared reflectography and scanning electron microscopy have caused museum researchers to reattribute a number of works. In 2022, the National Gallery stunned the art world by announcing that it now considers Girl with a Flute to be from the studio of Johannes Vermeer rather than from the artist's own hand. Now, given that there are only about 37 known Vermeers in the world, this is like the Smithsonian Institution admitting that the Hope Diamond is really a cubic zirconium. The work had been in question for years. It had been purchased by Joseph Widener, son of P.A.B. Widener, in 1923, and was part of the original Widener bequest to the National Gallery. But in 1978, it had been reclassified as Circle of Vermeer, but it was soon restored to the canon. But a detailed study of the painting's underlayers, analysis of its pigments, and evaluation of the artist's brushstrokes, made possible by newer technology, convinced the National Gallery to reattribute the painting. But, not to worry, the Philadelphia Museum of Art is ready to step up to the plate with a new number 37. Its Lady with a Guitar, part of the John G. Johnson collection, was long considered just to be a copy of Vermeer's The Guitar Player in the collection of Kenwood House, London. But in 2023, researchers suggested that the Philadelphia painting could be by Vermeer, marred by past cleaning attempts that removed much of the finishing layer. Now, PMA conservators are using the latest analytical techniques to determine whether Lady with the Guitar could be a genuine Vermeer rather than a copy. Now, despite all of the modern technology, or perhaps because of it, and the numerous revisions and reattributions it's caused, the market for both real and fraudulent art is still bullish. The new Gilded Age has created another winner-take-all market for art that makes the late 19th century look demure. As a result, prices have soared to unheard-of heights in the past decade. In 2017, an untitled work by Jean-Michel Basquiat sold for $110 million at Sotheby's. In 2022, Andy Warhol's 1964 silkscreen of Marilyn Monroe sold for $195 million. The apogee of the American art market may have been on November 9th, 2022, when Christie sold the collection of Microsoft co-founder Paul G. Allen for $1.5 billion in a single night, with 60 works by Cézanne, Klimt, Van Gogh, and Seurat fetching record prices. Now, while the art market has cooled off somewhat in the past 2 years, many prices remain at near historic highs. So it's not surprising that every day brings a fresh scandal involving fake art. Independent appraisers have estimated that at least 30% of the art in museums, galleries, and private collections are either misattributed or out-and-out fakes. Some estimates have put that figure closer to 50%. One of the most notorious scandals took place in 2011 when Knoedler & Company, founded in 1846, and one of the oldest and most reputable art galleries in the United States, closed its doors amid rumors of fraud and forgery. It was later discovered that the gallery had sold almost 40 fake abstract expressionist works by Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Robert Motherwell. Forensic results indicated that many of these works included synthetic pigments that were not invented at the time that the paintings were supposed to have been painted. Anne Friedman, the former president of Knoedler, was accused of fronting an $80 million forgery ring. Between 1994 and 2011, she had acquired these paintings from an obscure Long Island dealer named Glafira Rosales and her associate Juan Carlos Bergantinos Diaz. When Friedman asked for provenance, as any gallery owner would, Rosales explained that the masterpieces had all belonged to a wealthy dead man whose identity had to be kept secret because he was a closeted homosexual. In the art world, can you imagine? Well, the paintings were actually whipped up in a Queens garage by a Chinese immigrant named Pai Shen Qian. Qian usually received a few $1,000s for paintings, which Rosales sold to Friedman for millions, and which Friedman sold to her clients for tens of millions. Qian escaped prosecution by going back to his native China, as did Diaz by escaping to his native Spain. After serving house arrest and making partial restitution, Rosales was last known to be working as a waitress in a Brooklyn diner. And Anne Friedman? Well, she's opened a new Upper East Side gallery, Friedman Art, on East 73rd Street. But you can visit her website and listen to her discuss art collecting as a pastime and an investment. You can also watch the Netflix documentary about the scandal, Made You Look, the true story about fake art, absolutely delightful. And the list of frauds just goes on and on and on. Italian police in 2021 confiscated nearly 500 works supposed to be by Francis Bacon that would have been worth millions if they were real. In 2022, the Orlando Museum of Art was raided by the FBI over an exhibit of what turned out to be forged Jean-Michel Basquiat paintings. And in 2023, Canadian police uncovered the biggest art fraud in world history with a forgery ring faking over 1,000 works by the late Ojibwe artist Norval Morisseau, both before and after his death. So why do so many wealthy and supposedly well-educated people continue to be fooled, like Italian fashion and auction house executive Domenico De Sol? This guy was the chairman of Sotheby's. He spent $8.5 million on a fake Rothko from Knoedler's in 2004 and only subjected it to forensic analysis 7 years later when rumors of the other Knoedler fakes were emerging. Well, New York Times reporter Michael H. Miller suggested they wanted so badly to believe that these things were real because it was better for everybody if they were real. It's the Tinkerbell effect gone into overdrive. Or as my friend Cindy put it, there is no other business or commodity in America where the buyer colludes with the seller to cheat himself. In other words, many of these frauds are like Dashiell Hammett's Maltese Falcon, the stuff that dreams are made of. Meanwhile, as it has been for thousands of years, the art world continues to be a frenzied vanity fair, where wealthy status seekers fling their fortunes away in search of masterpieces that often turn out to be mere dross. And the rest of us get our vicarious chuckles from watching them. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for questions. I know that okay, yes, we have time for questions. Are there any questions? Or yes, ma'am, in the back. The name of the Netflix documentary is Made You Look, the true story about fake art. Definitely worth watching. They chase down just about everybody except for the lady. You can talk to the artist who is now back in Beijing. It's a fascinating story about the illusory value of art. Yes, sir.
Can you supply an estimate of what it would cost to use modern scientific methods to authenticate a painting? And would that imply that paintings valued at more than, say, $1 million ought to contain the authentication by scientific means?
As far as cost knows, I don't know. Cindy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, the cost is fairly significant, and forensic analysis, in my experience with my clients, has been better used to rule out than to rule in. So there are a handful of artists who created their own materials, and there are elements of those materials that can be confirmed. Gilbert Stuart, for instance, I think Jan Mass did confirm a Gilbert Stuart painting of Washington with forensic analysis, but for the most part, it's still being used to rule out. So, and the best you can get is this is consistent with the artist, with the time frame and the materials.
So it's not.
But I'm not an expert in forensic analysis.
Gotcha.
But this is my understanding.
Understood.
Yeah.
And one thing that did come up when we were talking is that if you want to make sure that you get put on the blacklist of never sell this person anything by every gallery owner and dealer in New York, ask to have a painting submitted to forensic analysis. You're not playing the game properly. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have two questions if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
The first is about maybe a third of the way through your presentation, the Vermeer and a couple others that went down to Washington, D.C. Do you have any idea why that didn't end up at the PMA? And if you will, my second question is, why didn't any of these people collect early modernists?
Okay, both very good questions. The first one, I think that it was a matter of prestige and finance. Duveen was actually the person who sort of began floating the idea of an American National Gallery among Mellon and his other wealthy American clients. You should have a national pantheon of art similar to the one in London. And so, especially for Mellon, who had been the Secretary of the Treasury, there was this prestige of sending the paintings to the capital, to the national capital, instead of having them at a provincial art museum. Widener did come under a lot of local flack for doing so. But the second part, other side of the coin, is finance. Widener got a $5 million tax credit for his gift to the federal government. This was in early 1941. The country was gearing up for World War II. Taxes on fortunes at his level, which were already high, were now at 90 to 95%. So if you had a $100 million fortune, you were paying 90 to 95 million of it to Uncle Sam. So a $5 million tax credit was huge, and it probably allowed him to continue living at Linwood Hall until his death in 1944. So that's number one. And what was number two again? I'm sorry.
I was curious why any of these people that you mentioned, the Bricks and all those, if any of them, why they didn't collect early modernists?
Because they were modern. They were a little too revolutionary. You did have people like Johnson's collection. John G. Johnson does have works by Manet, does have works by Degas. He had an incredibly eclectic palette for art. And so there were people collecting them, but it was the idea that you wanted a blue chip painting. And the modernists were not quite blue chip. They were sort of like vanguard stocks. Vermeer, Rembrandt, Rubens, they were the blue chips. They were the old masters. So that's what you wanted as the core of your collection. People did collect the modernists, but it would not become a big thing, I would say, until the teens and the 20s. Hope that answers your question. I see you, but yes, let me ask. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about Opus Monday, which has been one of the most controversial art.
Salvatore Monday.
Whatever it is. Yes. I'm not even sure if it's currently displayed at this point. Is it still in the Middle East, or where is it?
It's somewhere in the Middle East. It was purchased by a Saudi crown prince for $400 million, like the largest sum ever paid. By the way, in case people don't know, the Salvatore Mundi is the supposedly rediscovered lost Leonardo da Vinci, showing Christ holding the globe of the world in one hand and holding his fingers like this. There has been a great deal of controversy about whether this is a genuine Da Vinci, a studio of Da Vinci, painted by some guy who bumped into Da Vinci, that sort of thing, or an out-and-out fake. But it has gone through several cycles. It was purchased by a Saudi Arabian prince who was acting as the surrogate for the Saudi Arabian crown prince. I forget his exact name, but he is the lovely man who is being accused by the FBI of arranging the murder of the dissident Saudi journalist Khashoggi. It was going to be the centerpiece for a new museum, which is not under construction yet. It has been somewhere in this guy's basement, who knows? But it has sort of been one of the mysteries of the art world. Where is Salvatore Mundi? So, but it is another example of both the mystique and the craziness associated with the art world. Yes, sir.
One of Stotesbury's partners, George Thomas, also had a collection and had a private catalog. Do you happen to know where that ever went upon his death? He died, I think, around 1909 or thereabouts.
I do not know. Sorry. Can't help you. Does anybody at the Springfield Township Historical Society have any idea?
I don't know. I encourage you to reach out to Wayne Wilcox on his website and ask that question.
Okay.
He probably would have an answer for him.
Okay, very good.
Stotesbury.com site.
Would Wayne mind if this gentleman contacted him directly?
You can leave Wayne an email on his
Oh, very good. Okay. Let me reach out to Wayne and see what he knows. He might very well know. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, did Elkins, who was kind of a level of Weiner, did he collect?
He did. And again, like Widener, or actually he tended more toward the English Old Masters, and he did leave his collection to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And again, specialty was English Old Masters, excellent collection. That and the McFadden collections are the two sort of mainstays at PMA for English Old Masters.
So he wasn't chipped as much.
No, he wasn't. He always sort of let Widener take the lead, and in this case, that was probably a very good idea. Well, I think we